You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, this is Maureen Bogey.
And this is Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everyone to please like, share, subscribe, follow, tell your friends, tell your family, you know, the whole thing. Thank you so much for listening. Let's just get right into it. Let's get right into the nasty little, I don't know what I'm saying, but can we talk about, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about maybe one of the most profound UFO cases in history.
Yes.
It's often known as Britain's Roswell.
Yeah.
Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the Rendlesham Forest Incident.
I'm so excited about this.
This was so much fun to research, partly because, one, it's a cool story. Two, I had the best source. It's kind of literally the go-to source for this subject, but it's absolutely wonderful. It's a book called Encounter in Rendlesham Forest by Nick Pope with John Burroughs and Jim Penniston. John Burroughs and Jim Penniston are two of the men that were there that night that saw it first.
Oh, that's so cool that we're getting their perspective.
We're getting their perspective. And what's cool is because they're military guys, they have like literal, this book has verbatim interviews, like verbatim debriefings.
That's right. Yeah.
They have every word. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we are going to do, a deep dive on that first night. We're going to probably talk about Rendlesham again in the future because there are alternative theories as to what actually happened that are deserving of their own episode. Charles Halt, he is a character that is very crucial to the Rendlesham Forest story. We're going to just touch on him. We're not going to get as deep into him as some others do because I really want to focus on that very first night.
Yeah, so we will circle back to some more details about Rendlesham in future episodes.
Absolutely.
Which will be very exciting.
Whew.
Cool.
But good golly, I think I'm ready to get going. Well, our story begins early morning hours of December 26th, 1980.
Boxing Day, ever heard of it?
And where this story takes place is on the eastern coast of England in Suffolk County. There you will find two American Air Force bases, Bentwaters and Woodbridge. These bases are twin Air Force bases, and they're separated by a few hundred yards of forest. And this forest is where our story takes place. Rendlesham Forest. Well, on this night, day after Christmas, Airman First Class John Burroughs was patrolling when to the east he looked out and he saw red and blue lights, specifically a red light above a blue light, and it was flashing. So he grabbed his supervisor, Staff Sergeant Bud Steffens, and they both stared at this thing, and they had no idea what was going on. Mm-hmm. Both men obviously very well acquainted with the area because they are, one, that's their base, and two, they're Air Force people, so they know what's going to be in the sky. They certainly knew it wasn't anything military because nothing was scheduled that night to happen.
Right, and they're there so often, there's no way that there would have just been something there that whole time that they just missed and happened to notice tonight.
Well, as we said, both men very well acquainted with the area. Burroughs had actually been stationed on that base for about 17 months, had not seen anything like this before.
Right.
So at first, they actually thought it was maybe a civilian plane that had gone down in the forest. And like I said, they knew it wasn't military because nothing was scheduled, and they were afraid maybe it was a commercial plane. So obviously, they took off and into the woods just in case this was an emergency situation. And considering how close this was to air bases, they also had to check it out in case this was some sort of a potential threat.
Yeah, they're like, we got to figure this out.
So Burroughs and Stevens, they hop in a vehicle and they drive down into the forest, and they start to notice a white and yellow light also, in addition to the blue and the red. And they began to notice that this white light was particularly odd, and that the lights were behaving in a way they hadn't seen other craft operate before.
Okay.
So before proceeding any farther, they called in what they were seeing on a secure landline. Various calls had been made, and finally, a Staff Sergeant, Jim Penniston, is ordered to accompany Burroughs and Stevens into the forest to investigate what happened. Penniston is kind of the main figure in this whole story.
Okay.
So Penniston was a bit annoyed because he had not been debriefed at all on what to expect. So this was very much a break from the norm. It was kind of the first sign that this was not business as usual.
Okay.
The book also makes a point to mention that this could perhaps indicate that someone in the chain of command knew more than they were letting on. So these 4 men meet up at the gate: Peniston, Burroughs, Steffens, and then Peniston's driver, American First Class Edward Cabansag. They discuss what they saw. They thought it might have been a civilian plane crashing, but they heard no sound or explosion.
I was going to say
the other
that
thing.
if it was a plane crash, you would think that they would hear it.
Exactly.
It would be like incredibly loud.
Exactly. None of that. Airplane, as we know of an airplane, certainly couldn't have landed out there.
No.
That's when Steffens uttered something that struck a chord with everyone.
Oh,
It didn't crash. It landed.
weird, spooky.
So they call into the guy who oversees the flight schedules for the bases. They even put in calls to other bases, even to Heathrow Airport. They looked at radar, and radar did pick up unidentified craft in the area, but that it vanished right as it got over Woodridge Base. The 4 men drive into the forest as deep as their vehicle would allow. And this is a military vehicle. It started to get to a point where they couldn't even go with it. They had to get out on foot. So they're already seeing lights, as we know. And they were described as bizarre shades of red, blue, white, yellow. Well, soon they were joined by a Master Sergeant J.D. Chandler, who had come at the request of Peniston, who had requested backup. Because Peniston, when he called it in, said they were approaching with, quote, extreme caution.
Right.
And if this was a rescue mission, you wouldn't be approaching with extreme caution.
Right. They're clearly
You'd be busting
concerned.
like hell out to get there to save people.
Right.
So up until this point, the only discrepancy in the 4 men's stories was the order in which they arrived. Peniston said that Chandler was there when they arrived, and Chandler, vice versa, said the men were already there when he arrived. Up
Okay.
until that point, that's the only discrepancy. But after this point, all of these men's stories would vary wildly. So they get out of their car. They're walking into the woods, these 4 men. It's dark. Right about then, all 4 men's radios started to malfunction.
Oh, no.
And the book even says, we say malfunction lightly because what are the chances that 4 separate
Yeah.
radios malfunction at once? Most likely, something was interfering with their signal.
Exactly. Yeah.
So because of this, they set up a little something called a radio relay. Because if all 4 of them were to walk in together, they would eventually lose contact with base.
Oh.
So what they did, Chandler stayed by the cars. 3 of them walked as far as they could until they could barely get a signal through.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cabansag stopped. And then Peniston and Burroughs
Yeah.
kept walking. So you kind of had like what they say, a relay. So now Burroughs and Peniston are on their own, proceeding farther into the woods. Soon they began to notice something was wildly off.
Oh.
It was like there was static electricity in the air. The hairs on their neck and their arms stood up, and they found it difficult to walk. They would later say that the sensation was like wading through deep water, except, you're not in water.
Oh, just as
Imagine
they
that
were walking?
feeling. It's harder to approach. They aren't hurting. Nothing's hurting them.
It just feels like there's this kind of a force.
Almost like a force, right. They're not being hurt, but it's just this energy that's making it
air
harder
is
for them
thicker,
to...
yeah.
Exactly. And of course, they see these lights, and the closer they get, of course, the more bright and defined these lights get. So finally, they came upon a clearing, and it's brightly illuminated. Suddenly, there was what they describe in the book as a silent explosion of light. Both men instinctually hit the ground. After a few moments, Peniston rose to his feet. To his right lay Burroughs, completely engulfed in an immense light. Then, in front of him, Peniston says he started to see a bright orb of light that began to dissipate. But as it dissipated, Peniston could start to make out the shape of what he thought was a craft. As it became clearer, this was definitely what he was looking at. The craft was about 3 meters high and 3 meters across, kind of in a rough triangle shape. It appeared to either be hovering just off the ground or balancing on some sort of legs that you couldn't see from where you were standing. It had a bank of blue lights on its side and a very bright white light on top. There was no sound whatsoever from either the craft or nature.
That's wow. Okay. And you hear about
that
things
a
like
lot.
that happening where you can't, all of a sudden it's so silent.
Needless to say, Peniston is stunned, but he still had the wherewithal to know that he should probably take some photos and draw some sketches. So Peniston started to notice strange symbols on the craft. The closest thing he could compare them to were like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Oh.
So like I said, Peniston pulls out his notebook, a camera, he's taking photographs, all that stuff. Peniston then worked up the courage to touch it. He said it was like touching glass. The way I imagined it, it's just like touching like your iPhone. Kind
Right,
of.
yeah.
It felt like your iPhone.
Very
almost.
smooth.
He said that it was absolutely smooth, not a single seam or connecting point.
It's like carved out of marble.
So Peniston, like I said, worked up the courage to touch this thing. And like I said, very smooth. But the symbols, very different. They felt coarse, almost like sandpaper.
Okay.
This is what Peniston actually said.
The skin of the craft was smooth to touch, almost like running your hand over glass, void of seams or imperfections, until I ran my fingers over the symbols. The symbols were nothing like the rest of the craft. They were rough, like running my fingers over sandpaper.
So Peniston reaches out, touches this thing.
Wow.
As he touched the symbols, a white light on top grew immensely bright, causing Peniston to sort of jump back in shock. And then it kind of went back to normal. And then that's when the craft began to rise in the sky, seemingly to take off. And it actually maneuvered as if it was trying to avoid branches the best it could.
Whoa.
It still knocked branches off a tree,
Right.
but it was almost like it's like the equivalent of like seeing someone back out of a driveway. It was like watching something. It's like it didn't want to ding up the craft or something.
Didn't want to fuck up the lease.
And then second it got to the top of the trees, blink of an eye, gone. And Peniston even wrote in his notebook,
Speed? Impossible.
Now that is the title.
Now, what about our buddy Burroughs? When Burroughs came out of his trance, he had a completely different version of what had happened.
Okay.
He saw, as we know, when they approached, he saw the clearing and the bright light. Now, when that bright light shot down from above, remember, it engulfed Burroughs, didn't engulf Peniston.
Right.
Burroughs said he saw only the bright light and then a sort of red glowing orb that kind of had like he's described as a sun-like red orb in the place where Peniston saw the craft. Also, where Peniston's experience lasted several minutes, because he circled the craft, took pictures, touched it, watched it take off, Burroughs' experience was only mere seconds. Somehow, time was off. They searched a few more minutes trying to find more sight of the craft, and I think they actually did. They caught lights. They were able to see lights, and they kind of briefly chased things around, but, eventually, it wasn't like what had, just happened. Well, finally, Burroughs and Peniston emerged from the woods. And, of course, there's Chandler and Cabin Sag waiting for them, as they were, but along with 8 other military personnel. What seemed like just a few minutes to Peniston and mere seconds to Burroughs had actually been 45 minutes.
That is so... It's weird that both of the men had different ideas.
Yes.
Of how much time had gone by.
And it's about to get even weirder, because you think, hey, you know what they say, time flies when you're having fun.
It does. Maybe they were just having the time of their lives.
Even Peniston thought, oh, well, maybe it's because of my adrenaline. Maybe 45 minutes did go by, and it just felt like a few minutes because I was just so...
Right.
Jacked.
He was just like so jacked up, like so swollen.
Exactly,
sick.
right.
Yeah,
well,
throbbing.
an entire search party had even been assembled because they had gone radio fucking silent.
Right. That is fucking weird.
So, like you said, Peniston's like, well, maybe it's just the adrenaline, But when they got back to the base, they were stunned. Their personal watches were 45 minutes behind. So not just did it seem like a discrepancy in time, there was an actual measurable discrepancy of fucking time. Apparently, 45 minutes went by that they did not experience.
Well, you hear about this all the time with paranormal things in general, but especially with aliens and UFOs, is that there is a lost chunk of time.
Yes. In fact, Burroughs and Peniston, as you might expect, being military men, they're skeptics, right? They're a little skeptical.
They're like, excuse me.
In fact, here's a quote from Peniston that he kind of sets out his views, how he categorizes this.
My thoughts are simply that 99% of so-called UFO sightings can be explained by people with the knowledgeable background or aerial training to reporting such things for exactly what they are. Their UFO is an observation of the following type of possibilities: as a man-made object, star, planetary body, or other naturally occurring phenomena, all completely identifiable by a trained observer. There are also people who seem to have some physiological issues, which are, in my opinion, manifested exponentially when they see things they can't explain. I feel it is a natural state for those with tainted objectivity within their thinking and can have easily have occurred with other sightings. With that entirely aside, with the 99%, this leaves the remaining 1%. It is the percent I believe is the truly unknown. A conclusion I made after I left the forest that night. This is the very reason I am troubled by the events of December 26, 1980. I went into the forest with what I said being the case. Then I left the forest with the 1% factor reigning all over me. I had no answers for what clearly created conditions, effects, and the presence of an unknown craft with technology that cannot be replicated even today. So how does this all play? Simply 1% of UFO sightings are unknown.
Now, I want to say, all these guys, from what I know, I don't know anything, but they seem like good guys.
Yeah.
And I agree with them. 99%. I like that, because I think there is things.
Totally.
It just seems convenient to say, well, I don't believe in this stuff except what happened to me.
Exactly.
And I'm not putting him down because I kind of think that too. I think for a lot of things, there's reasonable explanations, but I also think that there are legitimate things that happen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of convenient to say that, even if it's true.
Right.
How convenient that yours is one of that 99%.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. I do, but like you said, I think it is healthy to approach things like this because...
Or how convenient that yours is one of the 1%.
Right. Yeah, the way that he kind of worded it could be a little bit like, everyone is wrong except me.
Skepticism is wonderful.
We need it.
But if you're going in with the intent to disprove, then you've got just as much dogma going on.
Yeah, these debunk, people that just are out to debunk.
So Burroughs, on the other hand, he'd come out of this experience a bit more dismissive, saying,
I never spent any time thinking about any of that. The only feeling I ever had was I hoped I never had to walk a mile in their shoes.
I don't think about that stuff, nor do I ever want to experience it, and I'm not envious of the people who have.
Yeah.
There was a big, Burroughs especially, all the men they talk about, very afraid for their careers. It's also important to note that obviously not just Penniston and Burroughs saw something that night. Mm-hmm. Now, only Penniston and Burroughs saw what they saw, primarily Penniston, but even Chandler, Cabansag, and a bunch of other peoples, they still saw the lights. And in fact, local Suffolk County police had even gotten calls from locals, from just local citizens saying they'd seen strange lights in the sky.
Okay, that adds a lot of credence to this story, I think.
Right. So even though Penniston and Burroughs are the only ones that got up close and personal, we at least know for a fact there was lights. And there was something on radar they didn't know what the fuck it was.
Right. There were people that were not involved with the core group or whatever that saw something. So I didn't know that. That's very good to know.
Yep. Just everyday citizens that live in the area reported lights and stuff. Like I said earlier at the beginning, there is another character that enters the story here, who's kind of crucial to the story. His name, he was the Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. So to give you a brief description of Halt, Halt is described as a very cool-headed, meticulous, thorough commander. He liked to get to know every facet of every branch of the place that he commanded, whether it was the pilots or the cooks or whoever. In the book, Penniston really revered him. He's what they called him I can't remember what the phrase was. It was like an enlisted man's commander. Whereas Burroughs kind of saw him as a micromanager. Didn't dislike him, thought he was good at his job, but thought he was maybe a little too handsome.
A little too, yeah.
Well, as was his custom, every morning he'd come in and he would look at the LE blotters, the logs, and these are the logs in which anything that's significant that occurred on the shift were recorded. Well, he heard a couple of staff sergeants having a chuckle over, people chasing UFOs.
Oh, no.
So he said, you know what, include that in the blotter, in case it became something of significance. So this would also be written into not just the LE blotters, but the security blotters and another form called an Air Force Form 1569, which I guess is like an instant complaint report you fill out if something happens. So on top of this, Halt suggested to them to use the phrase unexplained lights rather than UFOs in the blotter, suggesting that, there's a lot of connotations with the phrase UFO. Don't put that so people don't go like, UFO. No. And so this is one of those things. I understand both sides. I understand why Halt would do that. But the other side, Nick Pope, who wrote this, says, but maybe this is another example of them trying to downplay what they saw. You know,
True.
it wasn't a UFO, it's just some strange lights.
They're like, hey, it was kind of weird, but whatever.
A few hours later in the day, as people just kept, like, the buzz around this just wasn't going away. So Halt started to realize, hey, this incident may be more significant than just some strange little lights in the sky.
Right.
So he asked to see not just the LE blotter, but the security blotter and the Air Force form. Well, sometime during those few hours, someone had removed the blotters and the incident report.
What?
Staff Sergeant Coffey was quoted as saying,
My blotter was pulled and classified secret by Base Commander Colonel Ted Conrad.
to which Peniston offers this view on them.
The removal and classifying of the security blotters, AF Forms 53 and AF Forms 1569's Incident and Complaint Report, were part of the containment process initiated by others outside the base command. Colonel Halt unknowingly asked the desk sergeant to include the first night's information that they had already admitted on the morning after. I think it disturbed him when he became aware that the security blotters in the 1569s had already been classified and pulled. With the removal of the blotters in the 1569s without Halt's knowledge, it was much easier to put out a cover containment story about the nights in question.
And Burroughs said this of the missing documents.
That, along with all other missing documents, shows that this incident was classified early on. Also, there is no way they just disappeared. My guess is they went to Germany, and that the State Department got a copy too.
And what he means when he says to Germany, it is the U.S. Air Force headquarters of Europe, I guess, is located in Germany. Well, keeping all this gas, all this hot tea,
Oh my gosh, I'm loving it.
keeping all this under wraps was hard. Add to this that it was Christmas time. You know, it was the
Oh
day
my
after
gosh,
Christmas.
yeah.
You know, everyone wanted to be home, or they at least just wanted to be off the fucking base. Even
Yeah.
if they couldn't be home, they didn't want to be at the base. Add to that UFO excitement, and there's definitely, people are a little loose. It's the holiday. Of course, if you're the guy or gal in charge of the base, you don't want any loose lips.
Oh, they sink ships.
Yeah, of course. The book says there actually had used to be protocol in place on how to handle UFOs, but that was done away with in 1969.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And most famously, this protocol goes by the name Project Blue Book,
Yes.
which is an episode all its own.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
going to leave that there.
It's coming.
That's a big one, so keep that in your mind, ladies and gentlemen. So, the base commanders, they were equipped to deal with lights in the sky, but not lights that fucking land and then take off again.
Yeah.
Not only was there no one in the Air Force who really knew how to handle this, seemed like there was no one in the American government that did either. And this is when you start to notice the US and UK governments start playing a little game of hot potato.
Hot potato?
See, neither government wanted to deal with this bullshit.
Yeah, true.
And of course, like we said, they're very close allies. So you can kind of see this like polite game of, no, it's yours. No, it's
Right.
yours. And it is kind of the situation is kind of weird. And you can kind of, both sides of the argument make sense. So you have these two American Air Force bases.
Yeah.
But then in between them is this forest where it happens. Now, this forest is UK land.
Oh, it is.
It's
Okay.
UK, right? It's not Yeah, it's this. It's
Yeah.
still, So the U.S. government's like, well, it happened in Rendlesham Forest. Rendlesham Forest is part of the UK. It's the UK's problem, and the
Right.
UK was like, yeah, but it was your boys who experienced it.
So please.
So therefore, and they were on what might have been a potential rescue mission. So therefore, it's it's the issue of the U.S. to deal with. Neither side wanted to.
No
fucking
one wants
deal
to
with
deal with this. No.
No one wanted to deal with it. So it's kind of funny in that regard. So later that morning, so we're still going now. This is still the same day. These boys, they have not been to sleep yet. Because remember, this happened.
That's
So
right.
now it's been an all-day thing.
Oh, God.
Later that morning, Peniston and Burroughs, along with Master Sergeant Ray Goulias, met with two local gentlemen from the Suffolk Police who were a part of the 81st Security Police and Law Enforcement Squadron. And they wanted to have a look at this area as well. Well, in the clearing where the incident had happened the night before, they found 3 precise indentations.
Okay.
That, when measured out, would have roughly fit what Peniston saw.
Wow,
And
okay.
keep in mind, this is December 26th. The ground is frozen like a rock. And so they guessed, the depth of these indentations. This thing probably weighed,
Wow,
quite
right.
a bit, like a few tons, Peniston debriefs everyone, and he's going home. He needs a break. He hasn't slept, and he lives off base. He has lodging in the nearby town of Ipswich. Well, needless to say, Peniston couldn't fucking sleep.
Oh, that sucks.
Couldn't stop thinking about what happened. So he called up a local English friend that he had made who was an interior designer, and he asked if he could borrow some plaster and like a bucket and some other stuff, So he went back to the forest with the plaster. It was like a jug of water, a bucket, and he poured the plaster. He waited about an hour and then removed it from the ground. So he had plaster moldings of these indentations.
Okay, good idea.
So as they're leaving, he bumps into these guys, the gentleman from the Suffolk Police and some of the other men from the base who were searching the place. Mm-hmm. He bumps into them as he's leaving, and they told him that, don't worry about it. We got the situation. You need to go home, get some sleep. He didn't tell them about the plaster casts. And he even said,
I wanted to have something that was physical evidence of what had happened. I was driven harder by this thought after my meeting with the shift commander earlier. I had every intention that this was going to fade fast from radar.
It should be noted now that all photos that were taken after getting processed at the base's photo lab, like their photo development lab,
right?
Everything came back, quote, blurry or with nothing at all.
Okay, then why don't you just give them back?
I know.
It's like, why don't you let me decide that?
Exactly.
That's some bullshit.
Yes. Now, Charles Halt, I believe it was December 27th. I've also seen December 28th, but the book I read, I'm pretty sure it said December 27th. They were having a sort of year-end awards. They were having like a dinner on base and an award for the officers. All of a sudden, during the middle of this dinner, someone comes over to Halt's table, and they're like, sirs, it's back.
What?
Halt then goes into the woods, and this is a whole thing. They never see firsthand what they saw. They see lights in the sky, so they are there.
Right.
Nothing happens this night that's nearly as wild as the night before.
But you can still see these lights.
Right. But here's the thing. Charles Halt, he was commanded to investigate this thing. And Charles Halt also, he wrote his own book on Rendlesham, apparently. I haven't read it, but he wrote, it's apparently very good. It's apparently very dry and very long, but it's apparently a very good book. Halt said there was no way to determine how many people were actually on the scene. Very often people were walking and tramping right through everything.
Okay.
And he even wonders, was this an attempt to sully evidence?
I bet it was.
Were people brought in, maybe people didn't even know what they were doing, but they were just told, go check it out because they knew they would probably ruin shit.
Right.
There were so many people. Well, before we end this story, we've got one more big bombshell. Well, we saved this little bombshell for last because that's exactly what Penniston himself did. Now, you remember in that description of his encounter, he touched that symbol and that white light got real bright. He kind of jumped back.
Yes.
Well, Penniston was leaving out a very vital piece of the story that at the time he was afraid to tell. But now he's ready to tell the truth. Apparently, Penniston said that when he touched a specific symbol on the craft, when he touched it, not only did it illuminate, but Penniston says somehow he was telepathically given a message, which we now know as the Rendlesham Code.
What?
A binary message of ones and zeros. Now, he kept these in his head. He didn't know what to do with these. Finally, one day, he was compelled. He just kept seeing these visceral images of these ones and zeros.
And he was able to remember
Well, they wouldn't go away. The next few days when he's laying in his bed, he can't, these ones and zeros.
Wow.
Finally, he's compelled to write. It's almost like he has to, almost like you really got to piss. He's got to write. So he starts writing it down. And as he starts writing down this code, he feels better. Oh, it's like he's, feeling some release.
Oh, weird.
So I'm going now to read directly from the book because this is apparently what the code means. Also know there are phrases and words, but that most of it's actually coordinates. But I'll tell you where they go.
Yes, please.
So this is verbatim from the book.
Exploration of humanity. 666-8100. Coordinates. High Brazil. Continuous for planetary advan? ? Fourth coordinate. Continuate UQS CBPR before. Coordinates Caracol, Belize. Coordinates Sedona, Arizona. Coordinates Great Pyramid in Giza, Egypt. Coordinates Nazca Lines in Peru. Coordinates Taishanku, China. Coordinates Portal at Temple of Apollo in Naxos, Greece. Eyes of your eyes. Origin. Coordinates. High Brazil. Origin year. 81.
Now, some people might be asking, what's High Brazil? No, it's not Brazil, the country. This is something different. It's spelled HY-BRASIL. And what this is, what High Brazil is, and it's going to get its own episode. It's a legendary phantom island that's said to lie in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Ireland that appears once every 7 years. It's a very cool legend.
I love that.
That we will do. It's so cool.
Because it wasn't just High Brazil that he brought up. He also brought up Sedona, Arizona, which I think we've brought up before too, about how that's kind of a flap.
Yep.
And then also the temples of Giza were listed. 666.
666,
was one
yeah.
of the coordinates.
And
or
it says
something.
origin year 8100. So what are some theories? First and foremost, what if it was drugs and alcohol? Well, I mean, yeah,
We've all
maybe,
been there.
but I mean, they're actively working on an Air Force base.
Yeah.
Probably not going to be drugs and alcohol.
And that all of them.
Hallucinogenic mushrooms. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know, maybe if they accidentally ingest it, who knows? Delusions, hallucination, mass hysteria. Well, who knows?
Once
It just
again-
seems like, it's like, sure, I guess so. Could it have been some sort of a meteor or fireball? Interesting idea, but, fireballs don't usually stop. Like this one, let's say if
Right.
Peniston said what happened wasn't true, the way that those lights were acting, it does not
Yeah.
seem like a meteor or a fireball.
You're right.
And then, of course, maybe secret prototypes that people aren't supposed to know about yet. Things like that.
Right,
Now, that's
right.
very maybe possible. Here, let's get into more of the paranormal theories.
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, maybe it was an extraterrestrial visitor.
I mean,
Go.
kind of seems like it.
This is one I find most exciting. This one makes me think more of like Skinwalker. Was it a possible overlap of dimensions? Was this a possible something from another dimension that accidentally slipped through or didn't mean to, or maybe has the ability to jump back and forth, but maybe didn't mean to accidentally crash in the woods and like, oh shit, they saw us and takes off. You know what I
Right.
mean? Or it could just be future humans.
That accidentally kind of got in the,
Right.
through some sort
Right.
of
And
situation.
that's a big UFO theory too. There's also a big camp of the UFO community thinks that, hey, maybe these aren't other species. Maybe
Right.
these are us just from the future.
Whatever it is, whether it is paranormal or there is some sort of logical explanation, either way, it's very weird and interesting.
And before we leave, you can find it online. I think there's a long clip, 8 to 20 minute clip of real audio that was collected when they were out there. I think Charles Halt, maybe. Yes, there's actual audio they recorded when investigating. So to leave you guys, we are now going to play an excerpt from that audio.
Okay, stop. Right on. Hey, this is Erie.
Want to do the hot spots?
This is strange. Here, somebody want to look at the spots in the ground? Whoops, watch your own stuff. We're walking all over. Oh, carefully, sir. Okay, let's step back and not walk all over.
All right. Well, that is going to wrap us up for the Rendlesham Forest Incident. Thank you so much, Maureen.
Thank you.
This was so much fun.
A blast.
So much fun. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth,
I'm Maureen Bogey.
and this is Creep Street. Good night and goodbye.